They say some houses remember every footstep, every laugh, every tear. But what if the house doesn't just remember? What if it watches, waits, whispers? What if the walls are alive and hungry? This is the story of a house that never lets go. Once you enter, you're already home. The forest seemed endless. For hours, she had walked the narrow dirt path that twisted like a vein through the overgrowth. Each step crunched on brittle leaves, and each crunch seemed too loud, too intrusive, as if the forest itself resented her presence. Branches clawed at her sleeves. Roots jutted from the earth like ribs of some ancient corpse buried just beneath the soil. The air grew colder as she pressed on. First a light chill, then a creeping cold that sank past her jacket into her bones. She tugged her scarf tighter, but it didn't help. The cold felt wrong. Not the sharp, fresh cold of winter, but heavy, damp, oppressive, like the stagnant chill of a deep basement. The trees began to thin. Ahead, she saw it, the clearing, and at its heart, the mansion. It loomed like a shadow given form. 3 stories tall, blackened wood and crumbling stone. The house looked less like it had been built and more like it had grown out of the earth. A twisted, malignant growth that had clawed its way upward and stopped only when the sky refused to let it spread further. Windows gaped like hollow eyes. Some were cracked, some gone entirely, leaving empty sockets. The roof sagged inward in places. Vines choked the outer walls, their thick tendrils creeping across the facade as if trying to drag it back into the ground. The gate stood crooked and rusting. One side had torn free, its jagged edge twisted outward. The other side swayed lazily in the wind, creaking on its one surviving hinge. And then no wind. The sound stopped. The rusted gate stilled mid-creak. The air froze, and the forest behind her fell completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the faint rustle of leaves. She stood there, gripping the strap of her bag, breathing shallowly. Each inhale felt deafening. The house was watching. She couldn't explain how she knew, but she felt it. Its black windows stared down at her, and though there was no movement, she swore she saw a flicker. Something small, something pale, dart past an upstairs window. She told herself it was nothing, just her imagination playing tricks. Her boots crunched on gravel as she stepped closer. The iron gate resisted at first, but then swung open with a slow, drawn-out groan like the sound of a dying animal. She hesitated. The mansion waited. Every rational thought screamed at her to turn back, to leave this place behind and never speak of it again. But there was something stronger than fear pulling her forward. A compulsion, heavy and irresistible. Her foot touched the threshold. The house sighed. The sound was soft but unmistakable, like a deep exhale of stale air from a place long sealed. She swallowed hard and pushed the door. It swung inward with surprising ease. The hinges shrieked faintly, but there was no resistance, as though the house had been waiting, eager to welcome her. The air inside was cold and wet. The scent hit her immediately. Mildew, rotting wood, and something faintly metallic that clung to the back of her throat. Her boots sank slightly into the dusty carpet of the foyer. Dust motes swirled in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the boarded-up windows. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it came out in a shaky cloud. The door creaked shut behind her. There was no draft, no breeze. It closed slowly, deliberately, the way a hand would shut a cage. The silence inside was absolute. She stepped forward cautiously. Each movement sent faint echoes across the cavernous space. The house seemed to breathe with her. As she exhaled, the walls expanded imperceptibly. As she inhaled, they seemed to tighten. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom. The foyer stretched on into a wide hall, its walls lined with faded wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. Dust-coated furniture sat under filthy white sheets, their shapes warped by age and decay. And then, a sound. Soft, barely there. A whisper, too faint to make out the words, but undeniably human. She froze, straining her ears. Again, slightly louder this time. Here! The voice drifted from the shadows ahead. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination. The wind, old pipes, anything but a voice. But there it was again. She's here, this time closer. The house was not empty. She forced herself forward, though every step felt wrong, like trespassing in a sacred place. The wood under her boots groaned like old bones. To her left, deep gouges marred the wall. Long scratches, uneven and desperate, trailing from floor to ceiling. Not fingernails. These were too wide, too deep. Something had tried to get out, or in. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices now. Low, frantic, and layered. Male and female, old and young. Hundreds of them. Don't let her stay. She doesn't belong. Leave, leave. But underneath it all, a single voice spoke softly, lovingly. Stay. The hallway stretched before her like the throat of some massive, sleeping beast. Each step echoed far too loudly, the sound bouncing off the cracked plaster walls in strange, uneven patterns. It was as if the house wasn't just reflecting sound. It was holding it, rolling it back and forth, letting it build into a low, murmuring hum that didn't quite fade. She kept walking. The air grew thicker with every step. Her chest felt heavy, her breath shallow. The smell was worse here. A cloying mixture of mildew, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like pennies left to rust in a pool of water. She passed a crooked wooden table covered in a thick layer of dust. On it sat a vase filled with dried flowers that had long since turned to blackened husks. As she brushed past, she could have sworn she saw the petals quiver slightly, as though stirred by breath. But there was no breeze. The corridor branched left and right ahead. She hesitated, scanning the walls for any clue of which way to go. The wallpaper was torn in places, curling back to reveal discolored wood beneath. The patterns reminded her unsettlingly of veins under pale skin. Then she heard it again. A whisper, this time clearer. She's watching. Her pulse quickened. She spun around, heart thudding in her ears. The hallway behind her stretched on endlessly, dim and lifeless. Nothing moved, but she felt it. Eyes, dozens of them, hidden just beyond sight. They were watching. She took the left hallway. This one was narrower, more claustrophobic. The walls seemed closer together here, as if they were very slowly, imperceptibly leaning in. The floorboards sagged and creaked under her weight, dust billowing up with each step. As she passed an old picture frame hanging crookedly on the wall, she paused. It held no photograph, only a rectangle of yellowed paper where something had once been. But faint lines marred the glass. 5 long scratches, parallel and deep, like claws. The whispering resumed. Now it came from everywhere at once. From behind her, ahead of her, above her. Don't let her see us. Stay away, stay away. She doesn't belong. The voices overlapped until they were impossible to separate. Some were calm, others panicked. A few were giggling softly, a sound that made her skin crawl, and then one voice cut through the others. Smooth, cold, female. You shouldn't have come here. She quickened her pace. A door appeared ahead on the right, its surface warped and cracked with age. Unlike the others she'd passed, this one seemed inviting. A faint light flickered beneath it, barely enough to see by. As she reached for the handle, the whispering stopped abruptly. Silence fell, too complete. Even her breathing sounded muted, as though the air had thickened to the point of smothering sound itself. The handle was ice-cold beneath her fingers. She turned it slowly. The door swung open with a long, low groan. The room beyond was vast. She stepped inside and froze. Portraits, hundreds of them. They lined every wall from floor to ceiling, paintings of people long dead. Men, women, children. Some wore old-fashioned finery. Others were dressed plainly, but each face shared the same haunted expression. Eyes wide, mouth slightly agape, and every single one of them stared directly at her. She stepped further in, unable to help herself. The floor creaked ominously beneath her boots. At first, she thought the portraits were dusty, their colors muted with age. Then she realized the truth. Each painting had been defaced, as gouged out, mouths scratched into grotesque, too wide grins. In some, deep gouges tore through entire faces, leaving only smears of color on canvas. The air here felt wrong, heavier, colder, charged with a static hum that set her teeth on edge. And the whispers were back, so soft now they almost sounded like sighs. Don't look at them. Don't let them see you. Too late, too late. Her eyes were drawn to the center of the room. A massive mirror stood there, its tarnished frame carved into twisting patterns of vines and leering faces. She didn't want to look. She had to look. The reflection showed the room as it was, and her, but behind her stood shadows. Tall, thin figures, featureless save for faintly glowing eyes. They didn't move, but their heads were all turned toward her. She spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. She turned back to the mirror. The figures were closer now. The whispers rose to a fever pitch. She sees us. She sees us. Don't let her leave. Don't let her. And then one voice boomed above the rest. Deep, guttural, vibrating through the floor. Stay. The air shifted. The floorboards shuddered. The portraits began to change. Mouths opened impossibly wide, exposing rows of jagged teeth. From their eyeless sockets seeped black, tar-like tears that dripped down the walls. Some of them began to laugh. She backed toward the door. It was gone. The door was gone. Where it had been moments before, there was now only an unbroken expanse of wall. The faded wallpaper stretched seamlessly, curling faintly at the edges like a mocking grin. She pressed her palms to it, desperately searching for a seam, a hinge, anything. The surface was unnaturally cold, damp to the touch, pulsed. She snatched her hands back, heart pounding. The wall had just breathed. The portraits watched her, their grins wider now, teeth longer, sharper. Tar-like tears ran freely from gouged-out eyes, streaking the walls in sticky black trails. The sound of their laughter had grown louder, low, guttural chuckles vibrating through the floorboards. She turned back to the mirror. The figures in the reflection had moved closer. They no longer stood behind her. They were right beside her. Featureless faces leaned toward her ear. One raised a hand, long fingers outstretched. As its black, dripping fingertip touched the surface of the mirror, a sound echoed around the room. A wet, tearing sound. She spun, scanning the walls. The wallpaper blistered. Tiny bulges formed beneath it, shifting like something massive crawled just under the surface. The bulges traveled in slow, snaking patterns across the walls, pressing outward with increasing force. The air thickened. Each breath felt like swallowing warm syrup. The whispers returned, faster now, overlapping into a frenzied chant. She's here. She's here. She's here. Then the walls split open. A long, jagged crack ripped down the far side of the room. From the gap, pale fingers emerged, bony, impossibly long. their nails yellowed and sharp. They scrabbled at the edges of the tear, pulling it wider. Behind the splitting plaster, there was no wood, no insulation. Only veiny, pinkish flesh stretched taut, pulsing faintly. A hand shot out fully skeletal, wet with thick black ichor. It grasped the frame of a portrait, nails gouging deep into the canvas. She stumbled back, hitting the mirror. It rippled under her weight like the surface of a pond. Her reflection stared at her, grinning now, his eyes hollow, leaking black tears. The laughter grew deafening. All around her, the walls convulsed. More cracks spread, and from them erupted dozens of hands. Some small and childlike, others massive and gnarled, their skin torn and oozing, faces pressed forward, two mouths wide, teeth gnashing, eyes rolling madly in their sockets. "We're hungry." The voices weren't whispers anymore. They were screams. The floor quaked violently. Dust and shards of wood fell from the ceiling. She staggered, her boots sinking slightly into the boards. Then she noticed the floorboards themselves. They were breathing, rising, falling. Pale shapes moved beneath the wood, faces stretching against it, hands pushing up from below, straining to break through. A voice, deep, resonant, filling every corner of her mind, boomed. "You can't leave. You're already inside." She ran, but the room stretched impossibly. Every step forward carried her no closer to the walls. The portraits twisted and melted as she passed, their mouths opening impossibly wide, black ichor spraying out in writhing tendrils that lashed at her legs. Hands shot out from the floor, clutching at her ankles, pulling her down. She kicked free, stumbling toward where the door had been. It was there again, but warped, smaller, as though shrinking away from her. The voice boomed again. "Stay with us." Lunged for the handle. It melted under her grip, dripping like hot wax onto the pulsing floor. The walls began to close in. Faces pressed closer from every direction. Hands grabbed at her clothes, her hair, her skin. Cold, slimy fingers slipped under her collar. Clawed nails raked her arms and legs. The laughter became screams. The house shook so violently she thought it would collapse, but instead the walls bent inward. Portraits fused into a single massive face, its features grotesque and ever-shifting. Eyes rolling, mouths grinning and shrieking, tongues lashing out. It spoke in 100 overlapping voices. "We see you. We want you. You're ours now." The floor split open. Blackness yawned beneath her, a gaping pit filled with writhing bodies. Pale limbs reached up from the void, skeletal fingers grasping. One cold, slimy hand clamped around her wrist. "Join us," she screamed as it pulled. She clawed at the edge of the floorboards as cold, skeletal hands dragged her downward. Their grip burned like ice, nails tearing at her skin. "Let go!" she screamed, kicking wildly. Her boots connected with something solid. There was a crack, then a shrill, inhuman screech. One of the hands recoiled, snapping its brittle fingers in fury. She seized the moment, wrenching her other arm free. Splinters bit deep into her palms as she scrambled onto solid boards again. But the floor wasn't solid anymore. It pulsed under her weight, rising and falling like a living thing. Faces pressed upward from beneath, distorted, skinless, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. She stumbled back, gasping. The air was thick now, humid and heavy, stinking of rot and something sweeter, like meat left too long in the sun. "You can't leave." The voice came from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath her feet. "You're ours." She bolted for the nearest door, but the hallway beyond wasn't as she remembered it. It stretched on endlessly, walls bending inward, ceiling sagging so low she had to duck. The light dimmed with each step until she was moving through a tunnel of near darkness. Her boots slapped against the floorboards. Each impact echoed back twice, then 3 times, as if other footsteps followed just behind her. She didn't dare look back. A sound rose behind her. Not whispers, not laughter. Footsteps, heavy, wet, like bare feet slapping against damp wood. She ran harder. The air thickened, pulling at her like invisible hands. Her chest burned, her throat raw from ragged breaths. Ahead, she saw a doorway, tall, arched, its wood cracked but still intact. She flung herself through it. The room beyond was enormous. A dining hall. A long table stretched nearly the entire length, covered in a tattered white cloth yellowed with age. Place settings lay scattered, plates cracked and moldy, silverware rusted to near nothingness. But someone or something had set the table. A single candle burned faintly at the center, its weak flame casting long, twitching shadows, and every chair was occupied. Figures sat slumped around the table. At first glance, they resembled mannequins, stiff and lifeless. But then she saw the small movements. A hand twitching, a head turning slightly, a jaw creaking open in slow, deliberate motion. Their faces were ruined. Hollow eye sockets, torn lips frozen mid-scream, skin peeling in ragged strips, revealing yellow bone beneath. And all at once they turned to look at her. "Join US." The words weren't spoken aloud. They vibrated through the air, settling deep into her skull. "Sit, eat, stay." She backed away, heart pounding. A chair scraped across the floor, moving on its own. It stopped a few feet away, angled perfectly toward her. The candle's flame flared suddenly, its light illuminating the head of the table. There sat a figure larger than the rest. It was dressed in rotting finery, a tattered suit blackened with mold. Its head was nothing but a mass of writhing shadows, tendrils spilling down to curl around the table legs. 2 pinpricks of pale light blinked open where eyes should have been. It spoke with a voice that rumbled like thunder beneath the sea. "We hunger." The seated figures rose slowly, their movements stiff and jerky like puppets on tangled strings. They began to shuffle toward her, their mouths opening impossibly wide, black ichor pouring from their throats. She spun and ran back to the door, gone. The entryway had sealed behind her, replaced with an unbroken wall of rotting wood. "You can't leave." The voice pressed into her skull. The seated figures moved faster now, their bones cracking with each step. Hands outstretched, fingers like claws. "Stay with US." The shadows on the ceiling stirred. They spilled down the walls in inky waves, coalescing into humanoid shapes. Tall, faceless, their fingers too long, their joints bending backward. One reached for her, and she felt its cold presence before it even touched her skin. Her breath froze in her lungs. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to fight, to survive. She bolted for the far end of the dining hall. A door appeared there, or had it always been there? It didn't matter. She grabbed the handle, praying it wouldn't melt like the last. It held. She flung it open and stumbled through. But she was back in the portrait room. The mirror waited in the center, its surface rippling like black water. The portraits all stared at her, mouths wide open now in silent, screaming laughter. The voice was softer this time, almost tender. "Why do you run? This is your home now." She backed away from the mirror, but her reflection didn't back away with her. It stepped forward, and it smiled. The mirror rippled like black water. Her reflection stared back with hollow eyes and an impossibly wide grin. It whispered in her voice, "There's nowhere left to run." She bolted anyway. The door behind her vanished as she sprinted through it, replaced with a seamless wall. The air grew thicker with every step, humid and clinging, like wet fabric wrapped around her face. The hallway twisted sharply left, then right, then split into three. She took the middle path, but within moments, she passed a familiar gouge in the wallpaper. A deep, desperate claw mark she'd seen before. She was back where she started. Her breathing quickened. She turned right at the next fork. The corridor narrowed, forcing her to sidestep broken furniture and piles of debris. The floorboards groaned louder beneath her feet, as though strained to hold her weight. The walls pulsed faintly, their veins visible now beneath the paper. A faint heartbeat throbbed in the air, slow and steady. Not her heartbeat, the house's. She ran faster. The lights overhead flickered erratically. Shadows lengthened along the walls, stretching into long, skeletal fingers that scraped across the floor as she passed. The whispers returned, louder this time, frantic and overlapping. "She can't escape. Run, little mouse, run. We're right behind you." A sound joined them, footsteps, heavy, wet, slapping against the wood. They matched her pace, then grew faster. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The hallway behind her rippled like water. From the wavering dark, something massive began to crawl. Pale, spindly limbs pulled its bulk forward. It had no face, just a mass of writhing tendrils and teeth that clicked hungrily in the gloom. Its long fingers dragged deep gouges into the floorboards as it gained on her. "Stay!" The word reverberated through her bones. She turned sharply into a side hallway and froze. The walls ahead pressed inward, narrowing the passage until it became barely wide enough for her shoulders. She squeezed through sideways, splinters tearing her clothes, her skin. The house seemed to shiver with delight as its wooden ribs brushed against her. Behind her, the crawling thing screeched. It didn't follow, but the walls began to close. She stumbled into a wider corridor, gasping for breath. The air here was worse, thick with a coppery tang that clung to her tongue. Her boots squelched in something slick. She looked down. The floor was wet. A thin layer of black ichor coated the boards, rippling faintly as if alive. Ahead, a door. She lunged for it, heart hammering, but when her fingers brushed the handle, it melted, running down the wood in long black tears. The whispers laughed. "Silly little mouse." The hallway shifted. The floor rippled like a liquid surface. The walls began to lean inward, their veiny patterns throbbing faster now. She turned back. The hallway behind her wasn't there anymore. Only darkness, and in that darkness eyes opened. Hundreds of them. She ran, but the hall stretched endlessly. No doors, no windows, no end in sight. Just the whispers. "Run, run, run. You'll never find the exit. You're already part of us." Her legs burned. Her lungs ached. Then she saw it. A light, faint and warm. She sprinted toward it. The light grew brighter, spilling through a tall, ornate doorway. She flung herself through and froze. It was the portrait room. Again, the mirror loomed in the center, its surface still rippling. Her reflection waited there. This time it didn't grin. It spoke in her voice, calm and final. "You can't leave." Behind her, the whispering walls began to close. The walls pressed inward, the air vibrating with a low hum. She staggered back toward the mirror, her own reflection watching with cold, hollow eyes. "Let me out," she whispered, though her voice cracked and felt absurd in the endless roar of the house's whispers. Her reflection tilted its head. "Out?" it said in her voice, twisted and wrong. "There's no out. There's only down. The floorboards beneath her boots quivered. At first it was subtle, barely a tremor. Then the boards began to bow, sagging inward like wet cardboard. Cracks spiderwebbed outward, black ichor leaking through the seams. She tried to run, but the boards beneath her splintered. One leg plunged through up to the thigh. Hands shot up from the darkness below. Pale, skeletal, fingers tipped with broken nails. They clawed at her leg, their icy touch burning like fire. She screamed and kicked, her other boots slamming against the floor as she fought to pull herself free. The boards creaked, splintered, gave way. She fell. The darkness swallowed her whole. She plunged down through layers of damp wood and crumbling stone. The walls streaked past, coated in a glistening, fleshy sheen that pulsed with a sickly pink light. The air grew hot and humid, stinking of copper and rot. Finally, she slammed into something soft yet unyielding. The floor beneath her was alive. Pale flesh stretched taut beneath her hands, veins bulging and writhing just under the surface. It quivered with each of her movements, as if aware of her touch. She gagged, scrambling to her feet. All around her, the cavern pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a massive, beating heart. The whispers were deafening here. No longer voices, they had become screams. They came from the walls themselves. Faces bulged outward in the fleshy surface, their mouths opening and closing in silent agony. Eyes rolled in their sockets, leaking black ichor that dripped in slow, heavy drops to the floor. Some of the faces she recognized, people from the portraits. Others were strangers. And then she saw herself, her own face pressed from beneath the skin of the wall, eyes wide in horror, mouth opening to shriek. Something massive stirred deeper in the cavern, a sound like a wet exhale. The flesh beneath her feet rippled, veins bulged, then the floor split open. She tumbled again, this time landing hard on a slick, black surface. She was standing in a vast chamber. The ceiling arched high above, ribbed with thick cords of muscle. The walls pulsed, and from deep within came the slow, heavy thud of a heart larger than a house. Pale limbs protruded from the fleshy walls, arms, legs, even torsos, half-formed and twitching as if struggling to escape. The whispers here were a chant. We are the house. The house is us. You are the house. You will join us. A shape shifted in the gloom. It crawled forward on too many limbs, its body slick and glistening, stitched together from dozens of writhing torsos. Faces screamed silently across its surface, their mouths stretching impossibly wide as they melted back into the mass. Two huge, milky eyes opened in its center. It spoke with every voice she'd heard since entering the mansion. Welcome home. The floor convulsed beneath her, throwing her to her knees. She clawed at the fleshy surface, desperate for a handhold as it began to ripple violently. Hands shot up again, skeletal fingers wrapping around her wrists, her ankles, her neck. She fought, but they dragged her down into the warm, stinking flesh. It swallowed her inch by inch. The last thing she saw before the darkness closed over her head was her reflection in a slick, bloodied surface. It was smiling. There was no sensation of falling anymore, only floating. She opened her eyes, though she didn't remember closing them, and saw a corridor stretching endlessly into darkness. The walls weren't wood or plaster anymore. They were made of faces, hundreds, thousands. They stared at her with wide, dead eyes. Some whispered, some screamed. Others simply wept black tears that streaked down their cheeks and pooled on the floor. The floor itself was reflective, dark, wet, rippling like an oil-slicked pond. She looked down. The reflection staring back wasn't hers. It was a girl, younger, pale skin, wide, terrified eyes, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The whispers rose in her ears. She ran too. She screamed too. We all do. The corridor shifted. A door materialized to her left. It was a child's bedroom door, painted blue, stickers peeling. The name Ella was scrawled in crayon across it. The handle turned on its own. The door swung open. She stepped inside. A nursery. Dust motes floated in the weak sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. A crib sat in the corner, rocking gently as if an unseen hand pushed it. A faint crying came from within. She crept closer, every nerve screaming for her to turn back. Inside the crib was no baby, only a mass of pale, twitching limbs, tiny hands grasping weakly at the air, tiny mouths opening in silent wails. They froze as her shadow fell over them. Then, in perfect unison, dozens of infant eyes opened, black and shining like wet marbles. "Join us, Mama," they whispered. The crib rocked violently. She stumbled back, tripping over a wooden toy that squealed like a dying animal as it rolled across the floor. The nursery dissolved. She now stood in a kitchen. A woman hunched at the stove, her hair hanging in greasy ropes, her dress soaked with sweat and blood. The woman turned. Her face was gone. Only smooth, pale skin stretched taut over where her features should have been. Somehow she spoke. "I tried to feed them. I cooked, cleaned. I stayed. But it's never enough." Her hands shot out, clawing at the air. The whispers screamed in unison. Never enough. The walls closed in again. Now she was in a parlor. Dozens of men in tattered suits sat in high-backed chairs, sipping from empty teacups. Their necks were twisted at impossible angles, their jaws unhinged, tongues hanging limply. One raised its teacup to her in a mocking toast. "We stayed too." The house spoke, its voice deep and many-layered. "We remember them all. Every footstep, every scream, every tear. You are the newest memory." The faces pressed closer from the walls. Suddenly she was back in the endless corridor. But it wasn't her corridor. The faces lining the walls weren't strangers anymore. They were her. Dozens of her. Some screamed silently. Some clawed at the walls. Some stared back with hollow, resigned eyes. Each wore her face. Aged, decayed, twisted. "You've been here before," they whispered, "and you'll be here again." She clamped her hands over her ears. "No!" she screamed. The corridor rippled. A door appeared ahead, massive, ornate, its surface carved with countless screaming mouths. It swung open before she could stop herself. Inside was the mirror. It towered impossibly high now, its surface black and glassy. Her reflection waited, smiled. Its skin began to peel, sliding off in long, wet strips. Beneath was no flesh, only writhing shadows. It spoke in her voice, but deeper. "There's only one way out. Become part of the walls." The floor quivered beneath her boots. The whispers grew louder, their chant deafening. "Join us, join us, join us." The reflection stepped forward. The glass didn't resist. It reached out with one dripping hand. "Say yes." The reflection stepped fully out of the mirror, its dripping feet splashing on the slick, pulsing floor. It towered over her now, skinless and shimmering, bones glistening beneath a thin membrane of black ichor. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly. "Why run anymore?" it said softly, almost kindly. "It's so much easier to stay." Behind her, the walls groaned, faces pressed outward, their mouths stretching open into ragged, silent screams. Some wept, some grinned, all stared at her. The whispers swelled into a thunderous chant. Join us, join us, join us. She shook her head violently. No, she whispered. No, I'm not like them. I won't be like them. The reflection tilted its head. You already are. It raised a hand. The skin on her arms split suddenly, pain lancing through her. Black veins spiderwebbed up to her shoulders, pulsing in time with the house's heartbeat. She screamed, clutching at her skin. The reflection stepped closer. You're changing. You can feel it, can't you? The walls know you now. They love you. The floor began to convulse violently. Hands shot up, grabbing her ankles, pulling her down. The faces on the walls chanted louder. Become one. Become one. The reflection knelt before her, pressing a cold, slick hand to her cheek. Say yes. She remembered the others, the faces in the halls, the twisted forms in the nursery, the screaming men in the parlor. All of them had said yes. She looked down at her arms. The black veins crawled higher. Her fingers twitched uncontrollably. The house was winning. But deep within her, something stirred. Anger, pure, searing rage. No, she said, louder this time. The reflection froze. No. She tore her arm free from the grasping hands, black ichor spraying from torn skin. No! The air crackled violently. The floor beneath her erupted, sending jagged splinters and a wave of black fluid spraying in all directions. The walls screamed, not whispers this time, but ear-splitting shrieks of rage. The reflection's hollow eyes flared red. You can't fight us. Watch me, she spat. The room twisted violently. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, shards flying in all directions. Where the glass had been was now a swirling void, tendrils writhing hungrily. She felt the pull like a gale trying to suck her in. The house shrieked. The faces melted, flesh sloughing off to reveal raw, pulsing muscle. The floor gave way completely. She fell into darkness, through twisting tunnels of flesh and bone, past screaming faces and grasping hands. Her body hit a hard surface. Silence. She opened her eyes. She was standing in a clean, bright hallway. White walls, hardwood floors, sunlight streaming through open windows. Birdsong. It looked normal. She stepped forward cautiously. The air smelled of flowers. But then she saw them, shadows at the edges of her vision, long, thin fingers trailing along the walls, faces in the wood grain. The whispers returned. Did you really think you could leave? You're ours now. She ran for the door at the end of the hall. It swung open onto blinding sunlight. She stepped through and found herself back in the portrait room. The mirror was whole again. Her reflection grinned. There's no escape. The walls began to close in. This time she didn't scream. She smiled back. Then I'll burn this place down. The air rippled violently. The house roared in fury as cracks spread through its flesh. Fire erupted along the walls, searing the faces, burning the grasping hands to ash. The reflection shrieked, melting into a black puddle. The floor buckled, split, and white light. She opened her eyes. She was lying outside in the overgrown garden. The mansion stood silent and still behind her. Its windows were empty, its walls crumbling. She staggered to her feet. The house was dead, or so she thought. As she turned to leave, a faint whisper drifted on the wind. We'll build new walls for you. She froze. Her reflection in a broken window grinned. The mansion stood silent behind her, its windows black and empty like staring eyes. The air outside felt cold and clean. She forced her legs to move, stumbling through the overgrown garden. Grass brushed her knees, Flowers bloomed in shades she didn't recognize. The world seemed brighter, cleaner, alive, but every step felt wrong, like walking on a stage set. She made it to the iron gate and slipped through its rusted bars. Beyond was a road, empty, silent. She followed it. Days passed. She didn't know how many. Time felt slippery now, like trying to hold water in her hands. She found herself back in her apartment. It was exactly as she left it. Messy, familiar, safe. But it didn't feel right. The walls were too clean, the corners too sharp, the shadows too deep. At night, she thought she heard breathing behind them. The first whisper came as she brushed her teeth. Soft, gentle. Home, sweet home. She froze. The sound had come from the mirror. Her reflection stared back, smiling faintly. Second whisper came as she lay in bed. We like these walls too. The plaster above her pulsed faintly, as though something massive moved within it. She closed her eyes tightly, telling herself it was exhaustion, trauma, a trick of her senses. But then she felt it, a faint heartbeat, not her own. She tried to live normally. She went to work, saw friends, ate meals, but little things kept happening. Doors closed on their own. Paint peeled in strange patterns. Faces and hands and wide, screaming mouths. The sound of tiny feet running in her hallway at night. She set her coffee cup down one morning and froze. The surface of her table pulsed. She ripped up the floorboards. Beneath them was not wood. It was flesh, veiny, pink, beating faintly. The whispers were louder now. Every wall spoke. Thank you for bringing us here. We're so much cozier in your skin. Let's make it bigger. Looked in the mirror again. Her reflection wasn't hers anymore. His grin stretched too wide. Its eyes were black pits, leaking thick, tarry tears. It whispered, "You never left. You are the house now." She felt her skin ripple. Her arms ached. The veins beneath her flesh turned black, writhing like worms. She screamed as her hands split open, fingers elongating, nails curling into claws. The walls around her began to grow, stretch, shift. The small apartment became an endless corridor. Doors sprouted from the plaster, each one breathing faintly. She fell to her knees, clutching her head. "Stop!" she screamed. The voices laughed. "We can't stop. You invited us in. We'll keep growing, until there's no world left, only walls." The floor split. Pale hands reached for her ankles, but this time she didn't fight. She stood. The walls pulsed in approval. Her reflection grinned back at her, eyes glowing faintly. Time to decorate. And the house began to build itself anew. The apartment complex disappeared. Neighbors never existed. The street outside was swallowed in twisting corridors of wood and flesh. The world beyond the windows melted away. Now there was only the house, and she was its beating heart. The last whisper was no longer many voices. It was hers alone. "Welcome home." It began with a single heartbeat. Hers. But it wasn't hers anymore. The sound echoed through endless corridors, rattling floorboards, cracking plaster, shaking chandeliers until they fell and reformed midair. The house grew. The walls spread like roots, tearing through her apartment complex, the street outside, the city. Buildings split apart as veins crawled up their sides. Windows blinked like eyes. Streets buckled into spiral staircases leading nowhere. People screamed, but the walls absorbed the sound greedily. Each scream became a whisper. Each whisper became another brick. She stood at the center, or what passed for the center now. There was no ceiling above her, no floor below, only endless layers of rooms floating in a black void, each one unique yet somehow the same. Nurseries, kitchens, parlors, bedrooms, all breathing faintly. She felt the house's hunger thrumming in her skull. It wasn't just expanding, it was consuming. She saw faces pressed into the walls, old and new, neighbors, strangers, children, entire crowds. Their bodies melted into the wallpaper, their mouths still moving in silent screams. But there was no sound anymore. The house didn't need to whisper. It had her now. Her hands were no longer hands. They were elongated, skeletal, dripping black ichor. When she touched a wall, it rippled and pulsed eagerly. Rooms sprouted from her fingertips. Hallways bloomed like flowers. She saw herself in a cracked mirror. Her face stretched unnaturally long, her eyes black voids, her mouth a jagged, grinning slash. The sight didn't frighten her anymore. Felt right. The world outside was gone. There was only the house. It had no boundaries, no sky, no earth, just an infinite spiral of rooms, doors, and hallways, and all of them led back to her. A faint sound broke the silence. Footsteps. She turned. A man in torn clothes stumbled into view, gasping, clutching a bleeding arm. His eyes were wide with terror as they darted from door to door. "Hello?" he whispered. His voice echoed down the corridor. "Is anyone here? Please, help me." She stepped out from the shadows. The man froze. He stared at her warped figure, his breath coming in sharp gasps. What are you?" Her grin widened. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The walls behind her shifted and stretched, closing off the man's exit. Doors sprouted around him, each one breathing faintly, their handles twisting like skeletal fingers. The man ran for one at random. He threw it open and found himself in the same corridor, staring at her again. She raised a dripping finger and traced a line in the air. The walls obeyed, pulsing eagerly. They closed in. His screams didn't last long. Soon his face appeared in the nearest wall, mouth open in a soundless wail. She walked on. Every step left new rooms in her wake. It would never stop. She was infinite now. There were no whispers anymore. Only her voice, deep and resonant, vibrating through every plank and nail. "Welcome home." She no longer walked. She drifted, through halls that stretched beyond sight. Rooms stacked on rooms, floors layered like sediment from a billion years of screaming. The house had no edges now. There was no outside. She had become the walls. She felt them growing. One thought, one flicker of memory would send corridors spiraling outward. A remembered face would bloom in the plaster, mouths forming in the ceilings, eyes weeping ichor into bottomless stairwells. The house's hunger was no longer a growl. It was the only sound, a deep, constant thrum vibrating through an infinite lattice of wood, flesh, and stone. Planets cracked in her grip. She turned stars into chandeliers, galaxies into spinning spiral staircases that led nowhere. Every black hole now opened onto a parlor with a single waiting chair. The universe itself pulsed like a vast, suffocating lung, and she breathed for it. Faces appeared in the walls of reality. Her own face, over and over, smiling, crying, screaming, laughing. There was no longer any difference between the house and her, between her and us, between us and you. Because you've been here before, haven't you? The sound in your walls, the shadow in your hallway, the faint thump-thump under your floorboards at night. You thought it was the house settling. It wasn't. It was her heartbeat. She had become the house, and the house had become everything. The last whisper came not from the walls, but from the spaces between your thoughts. Welcome home. It started with a sound, a faint creak in the floorboards. You told yourself it was nothing, just the house settling. But the sound came again, closer this time. You wake up in your bed. The room feels off, the air heavier, the shadows thicker. The wallpaper curls at the edges like it's trying to peel away, revealing something slick and pulsing beneath. You hear it now, a whisper, soft, faint. We've been waiting. You sit up. The room stretches slightly, the corners pulling away as if the walls are breathing. No, it's just your imagination. You swing your legs off the bed, but the floor isn't wood anymore. It's warm, soft, wet. You stand quickly. The door across the room is closed, though you don't remember closing it. The handle twists on its own. A voice speaks from behind the door. Hello, it's your voice. The air vibrates. The wallpaper splits open, and eyes stare out from the walls. Dozens, hundreds, unblinking. Your reflection in the cracked mirror grins. Its mouth moves in perfect sync with the whisper. You're already inside. You run for the door. You fling it open and step into a hallway you don't recognize. Long, narrow, endless. The walls whisper as you pass. She ran too. She screamed too. We all do. You try every door. Each one leads to another hallway. Each hallway looks more alive. Veins crawl across the ceiling. Black ichor drips onto your hair and shoulders. The sound of footsteps follows you, slow, deliberate. They're not yours. You glance back. A figure stands at the end of the corridor. It's her. Or it was. Now she's nothing but shadows and teeth and a grin too wide for any human face. She raises one long, skeletal finger and points at you. The walls chant as they close in. Welcome home. You scream, but no sound escapes. It's absorbed by the walls. You press your palms to them in desperation. They're warm. They pulse. And then, you feel your hands sinking in. The walls part to accept you. Your face appears in the plaster. Eyes wide. Mouth open in a soundless cry. Your reflection smiles from the nearest window. It whispers, now you're part of the story too. And far away, in another world, another reality, someone else wakes in their bed to a faint creak in the floorboards. It begins again. You thought you were safe outside, that the whispers stopped when you turned off the story, that you could shut the door, pull the covers tight, and leave the house behind. But listen closely. Hear it? The faint creak in your walls, the sigh in the floorboards, the cold breath on the back of your neck. That's not your house settling. It's us settling in. Because once you've heard the whispers, you're already home.